Recently, another woman who falsely claimed she was sexually assaulted made headlines. Crystal Magnum went from a selfish, narcissistic person caring nothing for others whom she might hurt with false claims, to an angry murderer sentenced to prison for killing her boyfriend, to now a humble but brave woman apologizing and taking responsibility for her crimes and lies.
For everyone who chose to speak out against us before any of the facts were known, I truly hope that you are never put in a position where you have to experience the same pain and heartache that you've caused our families. While your hurtful words and outrageous lies will forever be linked to this tragedy, everyone will always remember that we told the truth. And in the words of Abraham Lincoln, truth is the best vindication against slander.
In case you don't know, I'm of course referring to the famous 2006 LaCrosse case. This is the case where a woman falsely claimed she was raped by some Duke University lacrosse players. She just came out last week, 18 years later, and publicly admitted she lied about it all. As a result of her lies, this case sparked the Me Too movement with a mantra of "Believe all women." The phrase started that same year in 2006 with a woman named Tarana Burke, a feminist activist. Promoting false stories that fit the agenda of the legacy media is basically known to be par for the course at this point. People are beginning to realize that just because a news story is out there, it doesn't have any bearing on whether or not it's true. When the left has a narrative they want to push forward, they look for stories that might fit it. Then they purposefully run with them and create propaganda with the information they gather. Truth is not considered. The money they can make and the narrative they're trying to advance are the priorities. Truth doesn't really come into the equation unless they're caught. The narrative they wanted to push with the Duke lacrosse story is that rich, evil white men prey on vulnerable, poor black women. This was the racial and sexist narrative the left wanted to push, and still does. And the story fit it perfectly. So they used a few facts and filled in the rest with lies to promote a story. They weren't interested in whether or not the men were guilty or innocent. The media promoted it as if they were guilty because that's what fit their narrative. And this is what they do. The lies Crystal Magnum told didn't just hurt the men she accused. It didn't just ruin their educational goals, their goals in athletics, their reputations, and their relationships with others. Think about the families of those men. The people who backed Crystal up believing her lies. The organizations that only heard her side of the story and went out in the media to condemn these men without any proof of their wrongdoing. News organizations wrote articles and did stories about how we should always believe women when they accuse men of assault. That just their words should be enough to condemn their alleged perpetrators. Evidence is not needed. As I said in the case of the lacrosse players, the narrative the media wanted to push is that rich white men are racist and prey on poor black women. The Duke story was a perfect way to promote that idea, so they went for it. The New York Times did over 100 articles about this case, and the lacrosse players were evil, privileged white men preying on innocent black women, and how brave the victim of their alleged crimes was to come out and accuse them publicly. The elite media and the university jumped to conclusions, and the district attorney did too. The district attorney of Durham County said in an interview with CBS News, quote, "There's no doubt a sexual assault took place and that the assault was racially motivated."
I am not going to allow Durham's view in the mind of the world to be a bunch of lacrosse players from Duke raping a black girl in Durham.
There's even a list of 88 elites at the university who took out an ad in the Chronicle newspaper during the time the case was still under investigation, suggesting that the case should start a dialogue about sexual assault on university campuses. But it was all a lie. So why did all this happen? Why did this woman accuse these men falsely? What was her motivation? And why do others, like Jackie Coakley, who falsely accused men at the University of Virginia? Mike Tennyson, a writer for the Washington Post, was also falsely accused. And the famous lawyer Alan Dershowitz, who wrote the book about it, he had the same kind of experience. He was falsely accused. He wrote a book entitled Guilt by Accusation, The Challenge of Proving Innocence in the Age of Me Too. Why do these women do this? Crystal Magnum says exactly why she did it.
I testified falsely against them by saying that they raped me when they didn't, and that was wrong. And I betrayed the trust of a lot of other people who believed in me. And made up a story that wasn't true because I wanted validation from people and not from God, and that was wrong. And I hope that they can forgive me.
Because she wanted validation from people. That's why she did it. And that has happened over and over again in these cases. When women finally come clean and admit they lied about sexual abuse, the reason is very commonly because they wanted attention and sympathy. And in our culture today, the reason is even more apparent. There are victim points in this social atmosphere that are acquired by identifying yourself as a victim. And what is just as sad and somewhat infuriating, these false accusations belittle real victims and their real suffering. But some might say, yes, but in the end the allegations were investigated and found to be untrue, so all is well. No, the harm was done to the men. The atmosphere this created makes it more difficult for real victims to speak out. And the innocent men who were caught in the fray are devastated, and so are their families, and always have a cloud of suspicion over their heads that comes from people who only heard the accusations because they were put out there wildly in the media, and they never hear the exonerating evidence. But what does this have to do with shiny slander and the women who accused Gothard and IBLP? First, the narrative the leftist media wanted to promote is that Christianity and homeschoolers are evil, abusive, and neglectful. That Christian families are not really as they seem, and behind the scenes, the children are being hurt, and that's why they behave themselves. That those who take their faith seriously and try to live by a set of standards that is not like the world are damaging their families and children. That Christian leaders are narcissistic and dictatorial and generally pedophilic predators. And that Christians harm women and sexually abuse them on a regular basis. All women in Christian fundamentalist families are downtrodden and oppressed by their evil husbands, fathers, and church leaders. That is the narrative that Shiny Happy People producers found irresistible in the false claims made by the women in the failed lawsuit against IBLP and Gothard. They were able to use the Duggar family as the model Christian family at the center, which was perfect because of their fame and popularity, and because there had been a real scandal that happened to them, which they could use to falsely link it to the fundamentalist Christian world in general. This situation was a dream for them to use, and the propaganda flowed from there. It was basically a perfect storm, and the producers could see that. Just like the false story of the Duke LaCrosse players was a dream for the media to promote the narrative of racist and sexist white men oppressing black women, the failed lawsuit and the Duggar scandal was the perfect storm for promoting the idea that Christianity and homeschooling is evil and abusive in general.
The Times coverage, which was both relentless and one-sided, there were more than 100 articles or opinion columns in the Times about the LaCrosse case, set the stage for the national media that, look, these guys must be guilty because it's the New York Times which is saying it, and if the Times is saying it, it must be true.
I don't think they want a lie detector test because they're afraid they won't pass a lie detector test.
And I may be the last person willing to take the heat because the victim is certainly taking a beating, as is Mike Nifong, and it's really unconscionably unfair.
This was a case that served differing agendas of differing groups. For Nifong, he wanted guilt because it would help his cause in the primary. For the Duke faculty members, portraying their own students as racist advanced an on-campus agenda of making more hires, dealing with topics of race, class, and gender, and requiring more courses in race, class, and gender. And for the New York Times, this was a case that fit very much the basic assumptions of a typical Times journalist, that white male athletes were out of control, both sexual and racial connotations, and that advancing this would sort of advance a broader ideological agenda of the Times. And so it was almost a perfect storm of a case in which a variety of different groups could exploit the case for their own purposes.
Another correlation is that the cases of Crystal Magnum and others who falsely accused men of sexual assault, their allegations were investigated for criminal conduct by government authorities, and the details of their accusations were available, so people in the public who wanted to know the truth of each of their claims could look up how it was shown that their stories didn't make sense and were clearly untrue. This information is in the public record. In the cases against Bill Gothard and IBLP, this has not been the case. Other than the rape allegation against Gothard, which was investigated and found to be false, the specifics of these other women's accusations have been put out in the public and in the media, and even included in a most-watched documentary on Amazon Prime's huge platform, without any of the investigation into those allegations being available publicly. Other than my investigations and putting out only a small portion of the information I have out there in the public, there's no one showing what the truth is regarding their claims. If the lawsuit against Gothard and IBLP had not been dropped, the evidence and clear falsehood of their allegations would have been a matter of public record. And it was clear that the plaintiffs in the lawsuit against Gothard and IBLP found that out, and they knew that, and so did their lawyers. So what is left is the false narrative that Gothard abused women and IBLP taught men to do so. There is no place, except my channel here, that the evidence of their false stories is exposed. Instead, you can look up IBLP and Gothard online and see a long list of podcasters interviewing the same people over and over again and making the same false accusations without any evidence to back up the claims, and almost no podcasts showing the exonerating evidence to the contrary. There has been an actual campaign going on for the past decade among a few disgruntled IBLP participants to discredit and damage the reputation of the organization and its founder, Bill Gothard. They have made it their purpose to destroy the ministry and Bill Gothard. And because of the way the media loves to discredit Christianity in general, they have found a media ripe for the picking to spread false allegations and stories of abuse that never happened. It is common for the media to spread a false story with sensational headlines for weeks. Then, when it's shown to be untrue, they bury the retraction, or they spin it to sound as if they weren't completely wrong, even if they clearly were. It's actually too bad the lawsuit was dropped, because if it hadn't been, the evidence would have come out that this was all based on repressed memories, and that the incidents alleged either did not take place or were taken out of context. It would have helped to correct the narrative that is out in the public now. Shiny Happy People producers had to know some of the allegations that they were presenting were not true. The false allegations of Danica Dillon, who alleged that Josh Duggar had a sexual relationship with her and paid her off to keep her quiet, shows the producers were looking for any tantalizing, sensational stories to highlight and push forward their narrative, even if they knew full well they were false stories. Court documents show clearly that Danica was lying, that there was no contact between her and Josh whatsoever, and that she made those false claims for attention and to make money. But Shiny Happy People still made this story part of their hit piece because it pushed their false narrative forward. In other instances, they either knew the testimonies they were showing against Gothard and IBLP were false, or they didn't take the time to look into the claims at all before putting them in their program. In other words, at best, it was just journalistic negligence. At worst, it was purposeful slander. And what about the false claims pushed by Shiny Happy People that the Duggar children were abused and neglected? That narrative was put in the documentary, making claims that Jim Bob was an evil tyrant in his home, and yet not one of their children has said they were abused or neglected growing up. They all have acknowledged very clearly that they had a wonderful and happy childhood and were loved and cherished by their parents. Even Jill, the one who is angry at her father for financial issues that happened between them regarding the proceeds of their reality TV show and agreed to be interviewed for that documentary, even she admits there was no abuse or neglect of the Duggar children. But that is now the narrative that is in the public because of false stories and claims by the media bent on damaging Christians and homeschoolers generally. But there is some good news. I can't give details because of confidentiality and because it's not for me to expose. But stories of the women who accused Gothard and IBLP in the failed lawsuit are beginning to fray. The false stories won't hold up forever. We will talk about repressed memories in general and about how many women who believed them have come to realize they were duped. Thanks for watching, and please remember to subscribe and share these videos so the truth can get out there. I'll see you here next time.